Welcome back to Rockford Reading Daily. We are continuing to read Sister Citizen by Melissa V. Harris Perry. We are on page 191. This new segment is entitled Black Women's Self-Definition. Quote, "Picture number 9 is definitely a strong woman," end quote, says Gloria, a talkative and opinionated 50-year-old Black woman in my New York focus group. Picture number 9, one of the 24 images of women that Gloria considered, shows a young Black woman standing on a deserted urban street holding a girl child. Both the woman and the girl are staring intently into the camera. The women in the other pictures are of various ages, ethnicities, and national origins. Some are photographed alone, others are with partners, with other women, or with children. Some are at work, some are at home, and some are vacationing. Participants in all of the focus groups were asked to look at each photo and then list the ones that depicted strong women. Some thought a group of Latina waitresses were strong, but others thought they looked simply young and carefree. Some thought an older white couple embracing in an intimate dance depicted strength. Others felt that the couple did not convey anything about strength. Some thought a white woman mechanic was a strong photo, but others disagreed. The one subject nearly every respondent chose as strong was the woman in photo number 9. For the women in the focus groups, this young woman represented struggle, self-reliance, and strength. Quote, "You know she is strong because she is struggling to raise her child in a ghetto," end quote. Quote, "You can tell from that picture what she is thinking. I got my baby and we're going to get through this together," end quote. Quote, "You can see the strength in her eyes. I can do this even if the daddy isn't around," end quote. Quote, "She is strong just because she made it. She survived," end quote. The women in my focus group spoke frequently and admiringly of Black women's strength. African American women outside my small groups also seem attached to self-reliance as an ideal. In March 2005, Chicago's major convention center, McCormick Place, hosted the 13th annual Expo for Today's Black Woman. The expo, sponsored by a local radio and television station, was widely publicized throughout the city as an opportunity to, quote, "showcase the talents and serve the needs of today's Black woman," end quote. The event provided an opportunity to observe how contemporary Black women actively construct their self-concept. Thousands of African American women came together to seek solutions to their life challenges by exploring them with other Black women. That the expo was a commercial endeavor undoubtedly influences how problems are framed and solutions are offered. Even so, the organizers had a sincere goal of addressing issues important to Black women. The advisory panel included Black women who are college professors, owners of small businesses, print and broadcast journalists, community organizers, church officers, and elected officials. It is fair to see the expo as a space where Black women explicitly sought to understand themselves at the intersections of race and gender. The seminars reflected a broad range of social, personal, and political issues. Aspiring authors could learn about publishing, and novice real estate investors could learn how to tap the value of their homes. There were seminars on health, weight control, and living with HIV/AIDS. There was a session for navigating sex and dating as a single woman, and another on strengthening one's marriage. Entrepreneurs discussed small business opportunities, and community leaders hosted discussions of Black Americans in the criminal justice system. The expo provided a structured space for Black women to reflect on themselves and the concerns that dominate their lives. The opening pages of the printed program contained official letters from then Chicago Mayor Richard Daley and Illinois Governor Rob Blagojevich. Mayor Daley's letter greeted expo attendees and asserted that the event, quote, "brings a sense of pride and community to African American women and men," end quote. The governor went further, stating, quote, "We as a state work diligently to ensure that women, and particularly minority women, have the same opportunities for success as men. This year's event will help to empower and enlighten you, as African American women, to achieve all your goals and dreams," end quote. Both the mayor and governor were featured prominently in the promotional materials of the event. These letters reflected the state's recognition of the attendees' consumer power as well as their potential political power. Black women attending the expo were seen as worthy of official recognition, and their empowerment was explicitly encouraged by the state. During the expo, a team of graduate students from the University of Chicago conducted brief surveys with 125 attendees to learn more about how they described African American women in relation to other groups. The survey began with an open-ended question, quote, "We recognize that everyone is an individual. However, there are some characteristics that individuals and groups share in common. Please write down 3 words or phrases that describe Black women, Black men, white women, and white men," end quote. Each respondent was asked to provide these descriptions without prompting or interference by the researcher. The results are striking for several reasons. The most frequently used term in any category is the word strong as a description of Black women, employed by more than 1 in 5 respondents. The 5 most commonly used words account for more than half of total respondents about Black women, about half of total responses about Black women, Given free rein to use any words they chose, these respondents showed remarkable agreement. They defined Black women as strong, beautiful, smart, independent, and kind. These descriptions fit a classic positive depiction of the strong Black woman. The next 4 most frequent responses also largely reinforced the strong Black woman ideal. Black women describe sisters as religious, powerful, aggressive, and giving. It seems that they have largely received the message that Black women are strong and good people. When asked to reflect on their characteristics, the image of the strong Black woman comes immediately to mind. The Expo respondents were not a randomly selected national sample, but they are an interesting and important group. Women at the Expo came together with the express purpose of thinking of themselves as Black women, spending time with other Black women, and finding solutions to their common concerns. When prompted to think about their group identity, they consistently define themselves as strong. This suggests the power of the self-reliance discourse among Black women. Respondents at the Expo offer similar descriptions of Black men. Again, strong was the most frequently used descriptor. African American men were also defined as handsome, smart, powerful, kind, and determined. But these descriptions vary much more widely. The top 5 categories accounted for just over a third of all responses. There was a less unified sense of Black men as a group. Beyond the top 5 categories, the descriptions turned negative. The next 5 most frequently used descriptors were angry, irresponsible, selfish, independent, and aggressive. While strong, handsome, kind Black men are the clear corollaries of strong, beautiful, kind Black women, there is a lurking sense that these sisters see Black men as very different from themselves. I'm gonna keep reading. I have no solid takes right now. When consciously thinking of themselves at the intersection of race and gender, as at the Expo, Black women are generally, but not universally, positive about Black men. They describe Black men as much like themselves, but with many more negative characteristics. There is evidence here of an intra-racial tension around gender. I do not want to exaggerate the significance of this finding, but it does hint at potentially important political possibilities. It may indicate that Black women feel solidarity with, but also responsibility for, their less competent or less trustworthy brothers. Maybe as strong women, they expect to carry the load for the race. Alternately, perhaps there is a seed of feminism here if Black women believe themselves to be more capable leaders than their male counterparts. Whatever similarities they express with Black men, the women at the Expo defined white men and women as very different from themselves and Black men. White men, in an inversion of the characteristics that American society values, were seen as rich, dishonest, arrogant, mean, and powerful. Although the respondents believe that white men are wealthy, this access to greater resources was not paired with desirable personal characteristics. Instead, white men's economic success was not thought to mitigate their arrogance and meanness. There is a vast and striking difference in how respondents described white women compared to Black women. White women were passive, stupid, dishonest, arrogant, and privileged, the opposite of the portrait painted of Black women. Not one person used, quote, strong, end quote, or, quote, independent, end quote, in connection with white women. This is evidence that black women perceive white women's lives and characters as distant from their own. They see themselves as having far less in common with white women than with black men. Okay, here, let's have a reflection there. Uh, hmm. I think what stands out to me about that is the gulf in which black women see themselves in comparison to white women, and it makes me think about some of the issues that would come up that we read about in Women, Race, and Class throughout history, and the reason that there was a deep there was a gulf of disagreement that existed between white women and black women about how to further, whether it be women's suffrage, whether it be women's rights, whether it be abortion rights and uh, contraceptive rights, and there was always this gap that existed because of race. And I think that there is something to be said, when we have a conversation about intersectionality of, and this isn't a tangible thing, you can't tangibly do this, but I do think the question is important to ask is, are black men and black women closer on their, how they see each other than white women and black women are? I can say as a black man, I see myself closer to black women than I see myself to white men because of how strong the racism is in this society. And that's not to say that sexism isn't strong in this society as well. It is, but and again, it's no way to tangibly uh, to talk about this, but uh, race is just something that is, it's harder to escape. It's something that's harder to escape. Uh, it's in so many places. It's in the holidays. It's in so much of day-to-day life and so much of entertainment. And again, it's not to say that sexism isn't, but almost wherever you can find, every place you can find uh, sexism, you can also find racism. And there are some places where you can find racism and not find sexism. I guess, as a man that may be a biased standpoint, but uh, I guess really and again, this is my personal experience. I'm sure that there's somebody with a differing personal experience as well. But that's what stands out to me is what I leave from reading from here is the question of, are it and again, it's not, you can't deal with one and not deal with the other. I think that's the other thing that probably highlights and stands out to me from this as well, is that even though it's important to ask, it's even though there is I can see purpose and reasonings for asking the question of, are black men and black women have more in common and closely related than white women and black women are. The truth of the matter is that you cannot, even once you get that answer, you can't just only deal with racism in a society that is this deep in sexism, this deep in this deep in sexism, just like you can't only deal with sexism in a society that's this steep and this deep within racism. And that also works for capitalism and homophobia and transphobia and all of these different things, and ableism, and there's a xenophobia. There's a list of these different things. But I do think that it is important to do internal reflecting and ask questions to your own community about where you stand in issues of intersectionality. Okay, let's keep reading. It is important to remember that these respondents weren't thinking of white women in the excuse me, let me try that again. It is important to remember that these respondents were thinking of white women in the abstract, not responding to any specific person. To say that black women as a group think of white women as weak, passive, and stupid does not mean that they think of every white woman in this way. Had they been asked about, say, Hillary Clinton, or been prompted to reflect on particular white women in their lives, the results might have been quite different. Still, there are important political implications. If these results hold in the general population, such an enormous gulf in the perceived characters of black and white women makes it hard to imagine African American women having much faith in cross-racial, gender-based political coalitions. Political solidarity must have some basis in a sense of shared identities and interests. African American women do not appear to see white women as natural political coalition partners. By valuing their own strength and denigrating that of their white counterparts, they reject any notion of similarity with white women. Okay, I'm just pointing that out for a section. Oh, excuse me. I'm just was marking that section so I can highlight it. These results may be jarring. We are accustomed to hearing about white Americans' opinions of African Americans. Historical accounts of race in America revolve around the changing feelings and attitudes of whites. News media focuses on stories of white prejudice or tolerance. Entire subfields of public opinion research in political science, psychology, and sociology focus on the sources and effects of stereotypes that whites hold of blacks. It is much less common to reverse the gaze and ask Black Americans what they think about whites. When African American women were allowed to openly express their dominant understandings of themselves and of other groups, they revealed a pervasive self-understanding rooted in the idea of strength. They also made clear their sense that white men and women do not share these essential characteristics. In a country where rugged individualism, the Protestant work ethic, and personal sacrifice are key aspects of the national identity, Black women have a heightened sense that their personhood is defined by their strength and independence. In their own perception, their strength binds them to Black men, whom they also understand as strong, but distinguishes them from white men and women whose wealth and privilege are associated with negative characteristic traits. The women in the focus groups provide a more detailed understanding of the idea of strength. As they discuss what strength means to them, they suggested that it is, quote, just a given when we are talking about Black women, end quote. They explain that strong women are able to handle everything they are given, endure difficult circumstances, act as a backbone for their families, and show both mental and physical toughness. They also describe strength as a kind of resilience. Quote, it's like the rubber band effect. You stretch a rubber band as far as you can, but it always comes hurling back. The ability to bounce back off whatever. Okay, let's continue reading. Mothers were regularly invoked as representatives of strength. Exposed to mothers, grandmothers, aunties, and teachers who were crucial to their own survival and development, these women looked to maternal figures as icons. They saw the photo of a young single mother as an image of strength, as was a photo of an older Black woman comforting a girl and boy child. Quote, you can see the strength in her face, and it's not from too much sun. That's from worry. That's from encouraging and caring, decision-making, end quote. Quote, that is the wisdom of the older Black woman, end quote. Both photographs prompted respondents to talk about their own mothers and the lessons of strength they drew from being their daughters. They spoke of their mothers as, quote, remarkable, end quote, independent, end quote, and, quote, dependable, end quote. Many women described their mothers as the ultimate role models of strength. They were committed to family, available as advisors, stern but loving, and able to cope with difficult circumstances. As they talked about the women in these photographs and reflected on those in their own lives, their descriptions underscored that African American women are deeply attached to an ideal of self-sacrificial strength evidenced by overcoming adversity. Unlike the stereotypes of Jezebel, Mammy, and Sapphire, the strong Black woman is widely embraced by these women as a truthful depiction of themselves and the women in their lives. Although they are affected by how others see them, African Americans have developed a communal self-understanding at odds with negative stereotypes. As Black women move through their personal lives, work at their jobs, and engage in politics, they not only react against external myths, but actively create new ones. The women in my Oakland focus group talked about why they wanted to be thought of as strong. Jackie commented, quote, I want to be known as a strong woman because strong implies holding things together and being very disciplined and being in charge. It's like glue when I think of strong, end quote. Bonita talked about wanting the ability to handle difficult times and circumstances and to help others. Quote, I want to be a strong woman because it means you get up and go when you don't feel like getting up and going. You do things for your family, you do special things for your friends, maybe even strangers, end quote. Although many celebrate strength as an essential and positive characteristic of black women, others are concerned about the psychological implications of attachment to an ideal of self-reliant independence. Social scientists, journalists, essayists, poets, and clinical psychologists have worried that strength has become a race and gender imperative. If African American women are led to believe that strength is an essential, inborn characteristic, a racial rule, then showing weakness or asking for help becomes traitorous. As popular author and psychologist Julia Boyd writes, quote, "Being strong all the time is a burden and doesn't leave us much room to be human," end quote. The strength mandate forces black women into painful silences about their own needs, even as they push relentlessly to serve others. Even as they celebrated strength, the women in the focus groups expressed concern about its limitations. They complained of never being able to be soft because everyone assumes black women are rocks. They worried that being strong means never having someone be concerned enough to care for you. Quote, "They know that you can take care of yourself, so they let you do it," end quote. And they were particularly worried about the self-sacrifice encouraging others to take advantage. Quote, "My mom gives too much. If my brother needed extra money, she would give it to him. I say he's 50 years old, let him go out there and get 2 jobs. But she would say, no, that's my child, and so I'm going to be there and help whenever I can. He takes advantage of her," end quote. Black women celebrate their powerful independence, yet worry that their self-image leaves little room for personal fragility or reasonable limits. Okay, that brings us to a changing of the theme within this chapter. Here, let's keep reading through this. The consequences of self-reliance. Although the strong black woman is a pervasive symbol among African Americans, it has been subject to severe criticism for several decades. At the Expo for Today's Black Woman, where attendees were so willingly to characterize black women as strong, one of the best attended sessions was, quote, "Escape the Cape, the Superwoman Complex," end quote. As African American women have increasingly organized on their own behalf in the past half century, they have also interrogated the limiting effects of the myth of strength. Yet there is little empirical evidence on how self-reliance influences black women's overall quality of life. To address this concern empirically, I turn to the 1995 Detroit area study, a detailed survey of several hundred men and women, both black and white, that examined the social influences affecting physical and mental health. Admittedly, this survey is dated and limited in regional scope, but it contains questions that are rarely asked of a large and diverse sample of Americans, and therefore is still useful for illuminating the concepts I am interested in here. The first important finding from the Detroit survey is that black women differ from other groups on a number of social and emotional factors. They lag behind black men and whites in both emotional and physical well-being. More than 50% of white men, white women, and black men reported that their physical health was very good or excellent. Among black women, only 41% ranked their health in these categories, and more than a quarter rated their health as fair or poor. The same was true of general life satisfaction. In every other race and gender category, at least 50% of respondents were completely or very satisfied with their lives, but only 42% of black women responded this way. African American women were neither significantly less nor more sad, but they were less satisfied with their lives and physical health. The Detroit study also suggests that black women experience their intimate relationships with friends and family differently than other individuals. While black women reported feeling loved by their friends and families as much as other groups, they also experience families as a site of demands and burdens and sense that their families demand too much of them. Black women reported lower quality of health, less satisfaction with their lives, and a greater sense of being burdened. No other group shares this unique constellation of concerns. Despite this, black women felt that they must be strong, independent, and self-reliant. They overwhelmingly believed that they could do anything they set their mind to, that their future depended on themselves alone, that having things done right required doing them yourself, and that signs of defeat were just signals to work harder. Together, these results speak to the particular legacy of the strong black woman as a cultural ideal. Black women feel less well, less satisfied, and more burdened than everyone else, and yet they believe it is their responsibility to overcome life obstacles alone and to achieve despite having fewer physical, emotional, and social resources. They are John Henry's sisters. Okay, that last sentence I think is highlight worthy. And the story of John Henry, I didn't really speak on that, but I've heard the name before. I don't recall the story that well, but I think it's very emblematic of the dangers of strength and the dangers of self-reliance and the dangers of independence. And I think that one of the things that leads to that existing, that self-reliance, that independence, is the fact that there aren't resources or there aren't outlets or avenues for assistance for Black people, and specifically Black women, as we're speaking about in here. And once you have that understanding that that is the case, uh, a lot of times it changes your perspective on life, and it puts you in a position where you feel like when you don't have an option but to be strong, uh, that you find the strength in some way, and the strength becomes part of who you are, uh, for better or for worse. Uh, let's keep reading, and I'm going to read. I don't think we're going to be able to get through this section without going a little longer than I would like to go. But I don't know. We'll see. We'll just keep reading, and we might be able to get through this specific section. If not, we'll pick it up next episode. These differences between Black women and other groups can help us test out how an insistence on self-reliance and a sense of being burdened by others' demands affects Black women's emotional well-being. Is there a relationship between life satisfaction and sense of self-reliance? Perhaps those who depend mostly on themselves are more satisfied with their lives, or perhaps an insistence on independence makes Black women feel worse about their lives. I am also interested in the personal stressor measures. We have seen that women feel more burdened by their families than do individuals from other race and gender categories. We have seen that Black women feel more burdened by their families than do individuals from other races and genders. Now we can test whether those burdens influence life satisfaction. Because the Detroit survey asked the same questions of a relatively large number of people, we can use a statistical technique called regression analysis to compare how these various ideas and beliefs affect each group. Several key results emerge from this analysis. In summary, the results show that life satisfaction is positively correlated with good health for both Black and white women. Sense of self-reliance has no statistically significant effects. Feeling loved by friends is positively correlated with life satisfaction for all groups except Black women, and religiosity is insignificant to Black women's life satisfaction. Feeling loved by family contributes to Black women's sense of well-being, but the negative effect of burdens associated with family life is larger. Decades of previous research have shown that perceived health has a consistent positive correlation with overall life satisfaction, even in populations that are quite healthy on average. The data from the Detroit survey largely confirms this finding. Both Black and white women are generally more satisfied with their lives when they feel physically healthy. The coefficient for white women is larger than for African American women, indicating that believing oneself to be in good physical health has greater explanatory power for white women's life satisfaction. It is also important to remember the difference in average health rating. Recall that only 41% of Black women rated themselves in the highest categories of physical health, whereas 56% of white women did. Thus, compared to their white counterparts, Black women reap fewer life satisfaction benefits from the good health they experience, and they also have significantly lower health self-evaluations. Importantly, these data do not reveal a role for assumed self-reliance in predicting life satisfaction for any group. People who believe that they are individually responsible for the outcomes in their lives are not systematically more or less satisfied than those with less self-reliant attitudes. For African American women, we might interpret this as a failure of the empowering aspects of the strong Black woman myth. According to these data, Black women are far more likely than other groups to believe that they are solely responsible for their life outcomes, but that belief does not make them happier or lead to a greater sense of mastery and satisfaction, nor does it make them less satisfied. It appears that although they cling to a self-definition rooted in strength, Black women's life satisfaction is located somewhere else. Two results in the analysis suggest that black women's service to others is negatively related to their life satisfaction. For black and white men, and for white women, feeling loved by friends has a substantial and statistically significant relationship to life satisfaction. In fact, for each of these groups, the love and support of friends contributes to life satisfaction more than any other variable in the equation. Although black women report feeling equally loved and cared for by their friends, this feeling has no influence on their life satisfaction. This does not mean that black women are inadequate friends to one another. On average, they feel that their friends are much less demanding than their families. Already overburdened by the demands of life, black girlfriends may choose not to impose additional demands on one another and instead work to carry their own weight. This may be why these friendships are not as emotionally protective for black women in this sample as for other groups. Importantly, this finding complicates the assumption, common in the self-help literature, that black women can survive the demands of the strong black woman syndrome by leaning. I messed that sentence up. Importantly, this finding complicates the assumption, common in the self-help literature, that black women can survive the demands of the strong black woman syndrome by leaning on one another. While friendships undoubtedly play a role in supporting and sustaining emotionally wounded black women, they have only limited capacity to undo the difficulties imposed by structural inequality. It is also important to note that religiosity has no relationship to life satisfaction among the black women in the Detroit study. African American women are profoundly religious. Even those who do not frequently attend church tend to profess a belief in God and claim that their religious beliefs guide their daily decision making. Black women seek professional mental health care less frequently than white women, and when they do seek it, they do so later in life and in later stages of their illness. Communal and religious networks are often the only marginally competent sources of support and counseling available for black women. Given the reliance of black women on church-based counseling, these results are notable. They suggest that although religion may help black women to survive, it does not necessarily make them any more satisfied with their lives. But these data are only suggestive of this dynamic, not definitive. I will discuss black women's religiosity in greater depth in the next chapter. Black women in the Detroit survey do respond positively to feeling loved and cared for by their families. For them, there is a significant positive relationship between life satisfaction and familial love. But this effect must be balanced against the negative influence of black women's family lives on their satisfaction. Feeling that one's family expects too much has a significant negative effect. While black women are happy that their families love them, they are heavily burdened by their family members, and this burden substantially reduces their overall life satisfaction. Together, these results underscore the popular critiques of the strong black woman that point to the deep personal costs black women bear as they try to meet the needs of others. Familiar pressure can have many sources. Black women are far more likely than white women to be single parents and to face single parenting with fewer resources. Black women's life expectancy outstrips that of black men, meaning that elderly black communities are largely female. Black women thus face being alone in both child-rearing years and old age. The data here suggests the possibility that this loneliness is a significant burden. Class structures in black communities also contribute to these familial burdens. Among black Americans, poverty creates anxiety, stress, and hardship, not only for the poor, but also for the middle class. The black middle class, unlike their white counterparts, is not divorced from the black poor. In urban areas, black middle-income neighborhoods tend to be adjacent to poorer and higher crime communities. Black families rarely enjoy intergenerational wealth. Sisters who have finished college often have less educated siblings. Daughters who own homes often have parents who do not. Cousins with disposable incomes frequently have loved ones without. This familial proximity to disadvantage means that the financially vulnerable black middle class must often contribute to the incomes of poorer family members. Such leveling amounts to an informal tax on middle-class black families. Such leveling amounts to an informal tax on middle-class black families. Sorry, I had to repeat that twice. It didn't register, so I read it the second time. Women are usually the mediators in this process. It is most often the daughters, wives, sisters, aunties, and grandmothers who negotiate the terms for transfer of goods and services from wealthier family members to poorer ones. These costs are real, both economically and psychologically. These limited but interesting results from the Detroit area study may hold hints to the psychological effects of these familial processes. Those who are interested in seeing the statistical results from which I have just drawn these conclusions can consult Table 6 in the appendix. That table will look pretty standard to the social scientists who regularly encounter these sort of findings. But for readers who are unfamiliar with statistical estimation, it could be confusing. My decision to include tables in this book is to give evidence of the relationships I have just discussed. If you do not want to read the statistics, you can skip the tables without losing the overall argument. However, you can use the tables to gain more insight about my conclusions. Taken together, the results of the 2005 survey of the Expo for Today's Black Woman and the 1995 Detroit area study provide insight into the prevalence of the strength myth among Black women and its influence on their emotional lives. Strong is the default category for describing Black women, but the myth leaves them sicker, less satisfied, and more burdened than any other group. Even in the face of these disparities, Black women maintain a staunch belief in the power of self-reliance. Rugged individualism does not make Black women any more satisfied with their lives, but the significant demands placed on them by their families substantially reduce their satisfaction. These data suggest that the myth of strength exacts a real and measurable emotional cost. Okay, that brings us to the end of that section. We were able to get through it. And that brings us to the beginning of a new theme within this chapter. The new theme will be entitled The Political Consequences of Self-Reliance. We will begin that on the next episode of Rockford Reading Daily. And I think we'll probably try to finish this chapter on the next episode as well. So that way we can start fresh on a new chapter for a new episode. I think the thing that stands out to me the most from the passages we just read, and maybe in this entire chapter, is speaking about the proximity to poverty and the burden that takes, and how Black middle class families are not divorced from poverty in the same manner that their white counterparts are, because of having family who are still most likely in poverty, or because of the middle class neighborhood being close to a neighborhood that is more tied into poverty. And I think that that's something that's I had never really contextualized or thought about before, or heard put into words before. But that also, it makes sense, and it's illuminating, and it adds to my understanding of these issues of racial injustice. And to me, this entire book has just added to my understanding of these issues. It's given me a more in-depth perspective of my cousins and my mother's experience, the friends' experience, and the experience of Black women as a whole. And I think that this is why it's important to read pieces of literature that come from a perspective that is different from yours, because it does a good job of widening your understanding of these issues as a whole. And so, yeah, that paragraph of the class structures in Black communities also contribute to the familial burdens, bringing it back to class. One of the things that Angela Davis did an amazing job throughout her book was each chapter she was able to bring things back to gender, bring things back to race, and then bring things back to class, and how all of these different things contribute to the societal issues that Black women deal with. And this class structure paragraph that we just read, I think, is very insightful and is very important, and it's something that I'm appreciative of Melissa V. Harris Perry for writing down. So again, we read through these different pieces of literature where sometimes you see the same thing in different books written in different ways for different portions, or you hear the same historical events, or hear some of the same statistics or things, hear some of the similar ideologies. But the more you hear those things, the more they get cemented in your mind, the more you're able to recall them and remember them, and the more you're able to deploy these ideological beliefs in conversations that we're having around the issues of police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice. So do me a favor, please share this on whatever platform you're listening to it on. We have about 2/3 left of it. We got less than 100 pages left of this book, and then we will begin reading another book, and I will uh, do my best to try to make sure I have somebody else with me for whatever book it is that we read next. So that way we can have two different perspectives. Okay. I'll holler at y'all tomorrow.